When Laura, a dedicated project manager, is wrongfully fired by her manipulative boss Darren for a costly mistake he secretly caused, her life is turned upside down. Struggling with a tarnished reputation and mounting rejection, Laura refuses to accept defeat. Digging into her past records, she uncovers a trail of Darren's lies, misconduct, and a shocking conspiracy involving corporate fraud and betrayal at the highest level. What starts as a quest to clear her name spirals into a mission to expose Darren's web of deceit to the world. As Laura gathers allies, evidence, and the courage to fight back, the truth unleashes a scandal so explosive it threatens to bring down an entire corporation. Packed with twists, revelations, and justice served cold, this is a gripping tale of revenge, resilience, and the unexpected power of standing up for what's right. When the tables turn, will Darren be ready for the storm he's unleashed? Or will karma destroy him, and everything he's built? For 5 years, I gave everything I had to my job. Early mornings, late nights, skipped vacations, it didn't matter. I wanted to succeed, and I thought I was on the right track. My name is Laura, and I was a project manager at a mid-sized tech company that specialized in software solutions for big corporations. To outsiders, it was just a job, but to me, it was my entire life. I wasn't just good at what I did, I excelled. I had a track record of finishing projects ahead of schedule, staying under budget, and keeping clients happy. My boss, Darren, often praised my work in meetings, telling others to be more like Laura. Little did I know, that admiration was a mask hiding his true intentions. It started like any other Tuesday. I arrived at the office early, coffee in hand, ready to finalize the details of a massive $3 million contract with a client we'd been courting for months. This deal was supposed to be my crowning achievement, a project I'd spent months carefully managing to perfection. Everything was in place. The client was thrilled, the team was prepared, and Darren had signed off on the final proposal weeks ago. At least, that's what I thought. By noon, my phone buzzed with an urgent meeting request from Darren. The subject line simply read, "Critical issue, Project Alpha." My stomach dropped. Darren never sent meeting invites like this unless something was seriously wrong. I grabbed my laptop and headed to his office, trying to keep my nerves in check. When I walked in, Darren was sitting behind his oversized desk, his chair turned slightly toward the window. His office was as polished as his appearance, sleek, modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, and an air of authority that made you feel small the moment you stepped inside. But something about his posture was off. He wasn't his usual smug, self-assured self. Instead, he looked almost nervous. "Take a seat, Laura," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat down, clutching my laptop. "What's going on?" I asked. Darren sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "We have a serious issue with the Alpha contract," he said. "The client has raised concerns about the pricing structure and some of the deliverables outlined in the proposal. They're threatening to pull out." My heart sank. "What? That's impossible. The pricing structure was approved weeks ago, and the deliverables were changed," Darren interrupted, his tone sharp. "I made some adjustments last month, and apparently, those changes have caused problems." I frowned, trying to piece together what he was saying. Adjustments? Last month? He hadn't mentioned anything about this to me. "What changes are you talking about?" I asked carefully. He avoided my gaze, shuffling through some papers on his desk. "Look, Laura, I don't have time to go over the details. The point is, the client is furious, and they're demanding answers. They're blaming you for not catching these issues earlier." "Blaming me?" My chest tightened. "Darren, with all due respect, I had no idea these changes were made. I wasn't informed." "You're the project manager," he snapped, cutting me off again. "It's your job to be on top of everything, whether you're informed or not. This kind of oversight is unacceptable." I stared at him, stunned. This didn't make any sense. Darren had always trusted me to handle projects, and I'd never once given him a reason to doubt my competence. Why was he suddenly acting like this was all my fault? Darren, I have documentation that shows. It doesn't matter, he said, leaning back in his chair. The damage is done. I've spoken to HR, and unfortunately, we have no choice but to let you go. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Let me go. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. You're firing me? For something I didn't do. His expression softened slightly, but it only made me angrier. I'm sorry, Laura. It's not personal. We can't risk losing the client over this. I wanted to scream. It wasn't personal. After everything I'd done for this company, after sacrificing my personal life to make sure every project succeeded, this was how it ended? Darren didn't even have the decency to take responsibility for his own mistakes. He slid a severance package across the desk. This should help you get back on your feet. And if you need a reference, I'll be happy to provide one. A reference? The audacity of the man was unbelievable. A reference won't help me if you're telling people I'm incompetent, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. Darren shrugged, his face a mask of indifference. I'll do what I can, but you need to understand, it's out of my hands now. I didn't say another word. I picked up the severance package, walked out of his office, and kept walking until I was outside the building. My head was spinning. How had this happened? How had I gone from being Darren's star employee to being thrown out like yesterday's garbage? And worse, how was I supposed to find another job when Darren had just destroyed my reputation? The days that followed were a blur of anger, frustration, and hopelessness. I applied to dozens of jobs, but every interview ended the same way, polite smiles, vague reassurances, and no callbacks. It didn't take long to realize that Darren's version of events had spread. Word travels fast in the tech world, and no one wanted to hire someone with a reputation for botching million-dollar contracts. I felt like my life was unraveling. I had bills to pay, a career I'd worked so hard to build, and now, nothing. Darren had taken everything from me, and he didn't even seem to care. One night, as I sat in my tiny apartment staring at the rejection emails piling up in my inbox, something inside me snapped. I was tired of feeling helpless. Tired of letting Darren get away with what he'd done. If he thought he could ruin my life and walk away unscathed, he was wrong. Darren had underestimated me. And he was about to learn the hard way that I wasn't someone to mess with. The rage I felt wasn't fleeting, it burned like a fire that only grew stronger with each passing day. Darren had stolen my career, my confidence, and my future, and I couldn't sit idly by while he got away with it. If he thought I was going to just disappear quietly, he was sorely mistaken. It was time to fight back. I wasn't sure how yet, but one thing was clear, I needed evidence. I started with my emails. Over the years, I'd developed a habit of keeping meticulous records of my work, including every correspondence, every project update, and every approval. I had never been the kind of person to leave anything to chance, and now, that obsessive attention to detail was going to be my greatest weapon. After digging through my archives for hours, I found exactly what I was looking for, Darren's emails. Specifically, the chain of messages where he had instructed me to make changes to the Alpha contract. As I read through them, my anger boiled over. There it was, in black and white, Darren had approved the risky adjustments that had ultimately angered the client. Even worse, I had explicitly warned him about the potential consequences in one of my replies. One email in particular stood out. From Laura Parker. To Darren Collins. Subject: Concerns about proposed adjustments. Hi Darren. I've reviewed the changes you've requested for the Alpha contract, and I have some serious concerns. The revised pricing structure might appear competitive at first glance, but it could backfire if the client scrutinizes the deliverables. I strongly recommend we reconsider these adjustments before finalizing the proposal. Please let me know how you'd like to proceed. Best regards. Laura. His response had been curt. From Darren Collins. To Laura Parker. Subject, concerns about proposed adjustments. Laura, just make the changes. This is the direction we're taking. Darren. My hands shook as I scrolled through the rest of the chain. I had done everything right. I'd flagged the risks, documented my concerns, and followed Darren's orders to the letter. And yet, when the deal fell apart, he had pointed the finger at me without hesitation. This was just the beginning. If I was going to take Darren down, I needed more than a single email chain. I needed a pattern, a history of his lies and manipulations. And that meant reaching out to others who had worked with him. I started with Jenna, a former colleague who had quit a year earlier under mysterious circumstances. Jenna and I had never been particularly close, but I remembered her as someone who always stood her ground and didn't put up with office politics. If anyone had dirt on Darren, it would be her. I sent her a message on LinkedIn, keeping it short and professional. To my surprise, she replied almost immediately, agreeing to meet for coffee. We met the next day at a small cafe downtown, where Jenna arrived looking as polished and confident as I remembered. But the moment we sat down, her carefully composed demeanor cracked. Darren is the reason I left, she said, cutting straight to the point. That man is a snake. It didn't take much prodding for Jenna to spill everything. Darren had stolen one of her ideas for a major project, passing it off as his own during a presentation to the board. When she confronted him about it, he brushed her off, claiming it was all part of the team effort. Shortly after, she found herself pushed out of key meetings and excluded from important projects. The message was clear: if she didn't play along, she wasn't welcome. I couldn't take it anymore, Jenna said, her voice tight with anger. He ruined my chances of getting promoted, and when I tried to speak up, HR sided with him. They always do. He's too good at covering his tracks. Hearing her story only fueled my determination. Jenna wasn't the only one Darren had wronged, and I was willing to bet there were others with similar experiences. Over the next few weeks, I reached out to as many former colleagues as I could. Some ignored me, but others opened up, sharing stories that painted an ugly picture of Darren's leadership style. There was Mark, a junior developer who had been blamed for a botched rollout Darren had mishandled. And Priya, an operations manager who had been fired after refusing to approve questionable budget changes Darren had demanded. The pattern was clear: Darren thrived by taking credit for successes and shifting blame for failures. And no one had ever held him accountable. By the time I was done, I had a mountain of evidence, emails, testimonies, and even a few recordings from meetings where Darren's arrogance had slipped through. But I needed to make sure this didn't just come off as a personal vendetta. I needed to present the information in a way that would expose Darren's true nature to the world while protecting my own credibility. That's when the idea hit me: an anonymous blog. It was the perfect way to tell my story, and the stories of everyone Darren had hurt, without putting myself at immediate risk. If I could get enough attention, the truth would spread like wildfire, and Darren wouldn't be able to hide behind his polished facade any longer. I spent the next few nights setting everything up. The blog's title was simple but effective: Inside the Corruption at Company Name. I carefully drafted my first post, detailing the Alpha contract debacle and including copies of Darren's emails to back up my claims. I made sure to keep my tone professional and factual, avoiding any language that could make me seem bitter or vengeful. Once the first post was live, I reached out to the journalists. I knew that a blog alone wouldn't be enough to bring Darren down. I needed the backing of reputable sources to legitimize my claims. I compiled all the evidence I had gathered into a neat package and sent it to several reporters who specialized in workplace scandals. Then, I waited. It didn't take long for the first journalist to respond. She was intrigued by the story and asked for an interview, which I conducted anonymously over the phone. Within days, the first article was published, and it was everything I had hoped for. The headline was bold and attention-grabbing, and the piece laid out Darren's pattern of behavior in excruciating detail. The blog was cited as a primary source, and the emails were included as screenshots. The article spread quickly, gaining traction on social media and sparking heated discussions in industry forums. Employees at my former company started commenting anonymously, corroborating the stories and adding their own experiences. Darren's carefully constructed image was beginning to crack, and I couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction as I watched it happen. But I knew this was just the beginning. Darren wasn't the kind of man to go down without a fight. If I wanted to finish what I'd started, I needed to be ready for whatever came next. The fallout from the article was immediate. By the time the story had been live for 24 hours, it was all over LinkedIn, industry blogs, and even some mainstream news outlets. Darren's name was trending, but not in the way he'd hoped. The headline alone was devastating. Toxic leadership exposed: how one boss destroyed careers to save his own. The piece detailed Darren's history of deflecting blame and stealing credit, painting him as the manipulative, power-hungry fraud I'd always known him to be. It included screenshots of his emails from the Alpha Project, anonymous accounts from former employees, and direct quotes from the blog I'd created. The response was overwhelming. Current employees of the company started chiming in anonymously, adding fuel to the fire. One comment stood out to me. "Everything in this article is true. Darren has been getting away with this for years. HR protects him because he brings in big clients, but everyone knows what kind of person he really is." The noise became impossible to ignore, and within days, the company was forced to respond. A carefully worded statement was posted on their official website and social media accounts. "We take the allegations against Darren Collins very seriously and are committed to conducting a thorough internal investigation. The behavior described in these accounts does not reflect the values of our organization." I couldn't help but smirk when I saw it. The company wasn't standing by Darren. They were throwing him under the bus, just like he'd done to me. But the investigation wasn't enough for me. Darren was a master manipulator, and I knew he would try to spin this situation to his advantage. He would play the victim, claim the allegations were exaggerated or baseless, and possibly even try to pin the blame on someone else. I wasn't going to let that happen. I needed to deliver a final, crushing blow that would end his career for good. I reached out to Jenna again, as well as some of the other former employees I'd spoken to during my investigation. I told them the article was gaining traction and asked if they'd be willing to come forward publicly. It was a lot to ask. Speaking out meant putting their names and reputations on the line, but to my surprise, several of them agreed. Jenna, in particular, was eager to take Darren down. "He's been skating by for too long," she told me during one of our phone calls. "If this is my chance to finally hold him accountable, I'm in." With their consent, I connected them with the journalists who had covered the initial story. The follow-up piece was even more damning than the first. It included first-hand accounts of Darren's behavior, including Jenna's story about how he'd stolen her project and sabotaged her career. It also featured a recording she'd secretly made during a meeting where Darren had admitted to taking credit for someone else's work. The audio clip spread like wildfire. Hearing Darren's smug, dismissive voice say, "It doesn't matter who came up with the idea. As the boss, it's my job to present it," was enough to make anyone's blood boil. Within hours of the recording being published, the company announced that Darren had been placed on administrative leave pending the results of their investigation. For most people, that would have been the end of the story. But I wasn't most people. I knew Darren, and I knew he wouldn't go down quietly. Sure enough, a week later, Darren made his move. He issued a statement through his lawyer, claiming that the allegations against him were part of a smear campaign orchestrated by disgruntled former employees. He didn't mention me by name, but it was clear who he was talking about. Certain individuals are spreading false and misleading information about me in an attempt to damage my reputation, the statement read. I look forward to clearing my name and continuing to focus on delivering value to my clients. I felt a flicker of panic when I read the statement. Darren was trying to discredit me and everyone else who had spoken out against him. If he succeeded, everything I'd worked for, the blog, the articles, the testimonies, would be for nothing. But Darren had made a critical mistake. He underestimated how much evidence I had against him. I went back to the blog and began preparing my next post. This time, I wasn't holding anything back. I published a detailed timeline of Darren's misconduct, complete with emails, meeting notes, and screenshots that proved he had lied repeatedly about his role in the Alpha contract failure. I even included a copy of the severance agreement he'd given me, which explicitly stated that I was being terminated due to organizational restructuring, not performance issues. The post went viral almost instantly. People were furious. They saw Darren's statement for what it was, a desperate attempt to save face, and they weren't buying it. The pressure on the company intensified, and within days, they announced that Darren had been fired. But the damage didn't stop there. The tech industry is a small world, and news travels fast. Darren's name became synonymous with toxic leadership, and no one wanted to be associated with him. His LinkedIn profile, once a carefully curated showcase of his accomplishments, was flooded with comments calling him out for his behavior. I thought that would be the end of it, but then I got a message that caught me off guard. It was from the client whose contract Darren had botched, the one he'd blamed me for losing. The message was short and to the point. "We've seen the articles and the blog. We now understand what happened with the Alpha contract. Let's talk." I couldn't believe it. The client wanted to hear my side of the story. It was the first time since this nightmare began that I felt like I was finally being heard. I scheduled a call with the client's team, and during the meeting, I explained everything: how Darren had made last-minute changes to the proposal, ignored my warnings, and then blamed me when it all fell apart. They were sympathetic and even apologized for believing Darren's lies. To my astonishment, they offered me a consulting contract to help fix the mess Darren had left behind. It wasn't a full-time job, but it was a start, a chance to rebuild my career and my reputation. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of vindication I hadn't experienced in months. Darren was finally out of the picture, and I was starting to reclaim what he'd taken from me. But more than that, I realized I had done something bigger than myself. By exposing Darren, I'd helped protect others from becoming his next victims. Justice had been served, but I knew this wasn't the end of my journey. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was no longer afraid to stand up for myself, no matter the cost. In the weeks that followed Darren's downfall, I started to piece my life back together. The consulting contract with the former client kept me busy and gave me a sense of purpose again. It felt good to be back in control of my career, even if it was just one project at a time. My blog had become something of a sensation in industry circles, with more and more people reaching out to share their own workplace horror stories. But even as I moved forward, something about the whole ordeal with Darren didn't sit right with me. The deeper I thought about it, the more I realized there were still unanswered questions, particularly about how Darren had managed to stay untouchable for so long. Yes, he was manipulative and charismatic, but there was more to it than that. Darren wasn't just a bad boss, he was untouchable. One night, as I was sifting through the emails and documents I had collected during my investigation, I stumbled across something strange: a set of financial reports Darren had been CC'd on during one of our earlier projects. At first glance, they looked like standard budget documents. But the more I looked, the more inconsistencies I noticed. Numbers didn't add up. Certain expenses were mislabeled or outright missing. It was subtle, something you wouldn't catch unless you knew what to look for. I felt my pulse quicken. Was this just sloppy accounting, or was Darren involved in something bigger than just bad leadership? Fueled by curiosity, I dug deeper. I started cross-referencing those reports with other documents I'd saved from my time at the company. Patterns began to emerge, patterns that pointed to something far more sinister than I had anticipated. It wasn't just the alpha contract Darren had meddled with. He had been fudging numbers, inflating revenue projections, and shifting budgets between projects for years. It was fraud. At first, I wasn't sure how far it went. Was Darren pocketing the money himself? Or was he just trying to make his division look more profitable to secure his position? Either way, it was clear that he'd been cooking the books to cover his mistakes and make himself look like a hero. The company's executives had either turned a blind eye or been completely oblivious, trusting Darren's successes without digging into the details. This was no longer just about me or my ruined career. Darren's fraud had likely cost the company millions, and it wasn't just their money he was playing with. Clients, employees, and even shareholders had been affected. I realized I couldn't let this go. I reached out to Jenna again, sharing my discovery and asking if she had any insight. To my shock, she told me she had noticed something similar during her time at the company but hadn't been able to prove it. She had even gone to HR once with her suspicions, only to be brushed off. "He's protected," Jenna said bitterly. "I don't know how, but he's got someone powerful in his corner. Someone who makes sure he never faces consequences." Her words sent a chill down my spine. If Darren really had connections that high up, exposing him would be even more dangerous than I thought. But it also made me more determined than ever to see this through. I decided to reach out to the journalist who had written the original article about Darren. I sent her the financial reports, along with my analysis and Jenna's corroboration. Her response was immediate and filled with barely contained excitement. "This is huge. Let me dig into this. If what you're saying is true, this could turn into a massive corporate scandal." For the next few weeks, the journalist and her team worked tirelessly, digging into Darren's finances and uncovering a trail of deceit that stretched back nearly a decade. The scale of his fraud was staggering. He had inflated revenue projections to meet quarterly targets, funneled money between projects to hide losses, and even created fake client accounts to pad the books. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. As the journalist continued her investigation, she uncovered a connection between Darren and the company's chief financial officer, Amanda Greer. It turned out Amanda had been complicit in Darren's schemes, signing off on his doctored reports and helping him cover up his tracks. The two of them had been working together for years, creating an elaborate facade of profitability that kept the company's board of directors happy and clueless. And here's where it got truly scandalous: Darren and Amanda weren't just professional partners. They were having an affair. This wasn't just workplace fraud anymore, it was a full-blown corporate conspiracy. The journalist broke the story in a bombshell exposé that sent shockwaves through the industry. The headline was brutal. "Sex, Lies, and Fraud, the Corporate Scandal That Brought Company Name to Its Knees." The article detailed everything, from the financial manipulation to the personal relationship between Darren and Amanda. Within hours of the story going live, the company's stock price plummeted. The board of directors scrambled to control the damage, firing Amanda and issuing a public statement condemning her and Darren's actions. But it was too late. The damage was done. Darren's name was permanently tarnished, Amanda's career was over, and the company itself was facing multiple lawsuits from shareholders and clients. As for me, I watched it all unfold with a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. I had set out to expose Darren for what he'd done to me, but in the process, I had uncovered a scandal that went far beyond anything I could have imagined. One morning, I received an email from the journalist. It was short, but it brought a smile to my face. "You did this. Justice served." In the end, I realized that Darren's downfall wasn't just about revenge, it was about accountability. People like Darren and Amanda thrive when no one dares to challenge them. But the moment someone stands up and shines a light on their actions, their power crumbles. I went to bed that night feeling lighter than I had in months. I didn't just get my justice, I helped ensure that no one else would have to suffer at Darren's hands ever again. And as for Darren, the last I heard, he was under investigation by the SEC and facing potential prison time. Sometimes, karma doesn't just knock, it kicks the door down.